I'm a writer and a curator and a fashion stylist, and I have the pleasure today of introducing Nigel Freeman, who is the Director of Fine Arts here at Swann Galleries, which is, of course, as you know, they hold sales twice a year. He has founded this gallery since 2007.
This department.
Pardon me?
My department.
My department, sorry. This is my first time talking about art, so yeah, at one point I'm just kind of nervous, and then part of me is like, wait a minute, I'm going to go really fast.
You're doing great.
He's played a central role in developing the booming market for art that is by African American artists. We have Nigel Freeman here. The second gentleman that we are honored to have here, who needs really no introduction, is Danny Simmons. Danny Simmons is an artist, poet, author, collector, and philanthropist. I like to call him an autodidactic polymath, if you want to use $20 words. From Queens, New York. His talent and passion for the arts reaches beyond the canvas. He's become a leader in the art world with his philanthropic ventures and is a co-founder of Rush Philanthropic Arts Foundation. I like to start things with where we are, so I'm going to do a little bit of a history lesson and sort of guide you through that. African American art right now is in its moment with record-breaking auctions of the work by the likes of Basquiat, Mark Branford, Kerry James Marshall, Julie Metru, and I'm going to say this, Ndeka Akanili Crosby.
Very well.
We have the presidential portraits by Kayindi Wiley and Amy Sherrill, two African American artists.
I wore the socks.
He has the socks. And we've had... Yes, he does.
It's the only candy I can afford.
We've had these huge solo shows by Kerry James Marshall. There's a huge show right now going on in London with Kara Walker at the Tate Modern, as well as these amazing posthumous shows by Kerry James Marshall. Not by Kerry James Marshall, by Charles White. Charles White and Kerry James Marshall are being sold in the show, by the way, FYI. We have collective shows like Soul of a Nation. Right now, Kayindi Wiley is doing his sculpture is in the middle of Times Square, and we have Simone Lee's piece, which is in the middle of the High Line.
Right, yeah.
So we're having our moment. So specifically, how do we get to this place? And as you know, as a good Catholic girl, I tell you everything starts with the book, right? Back in 1965, Romare Bearden realized during a lecture much like this that there was no definitive information about a lot of African American artists. So he collaborated with a gentleman by the name of Harry B. Henderson. I'm trying to remember all of this off the top of my head. And they decided to put together a book. And the first book was this one that I've had, which is Six Black Masters of American Art. This book was finished about a decade after Romare Bearden died. And it was one of the only sort of documentations of all of these black artists. And without this book, a lot of these artists we wouldn't know about. A lot of these artists, if not all of them, have been in the show or in the shows that Swann has been part of the auction off. So I wanted to talk to Nigel first about how his relationship with Harry B. Henderson happened and all of that stuff.
Of course. Well, thank you, Rebecca. And yeah, it's true. We have a connection to Henderson, who wrote this book, and I have a personal connection as well. My wife, who's here tonight somewhere, Peyton, has a book, a bigger version of that book that Henderson and Bearden kind of developed it into like a coffee table book, a whole history of African American art. There she is. And it had all the African American artists of the modern period. And you would look at this book and you would say, well, these are fantastic artists. Why don't I see them at Swann? Why don't I see them in other auction houses? You could find them in specialty galleries, and there were wonderful galleries that showed African American art in the 90s and the O's since I've been here. But where was the African American presence at auction? So I was lucky enough to be here at Swann when the estate of Henderson, he passed, and his son, Albert Henderson, who's also a writer, who wrote a book about Edmonia Lewis. Albert contacted me, contacted Swann. His father's estate had a wonderful collection of the works by Romare Bearden, including 2 collages from the National Gallery. It was just, incredible. So I had to have it. Managed to get it to Swann. And around that, we built a selection of works by other African-American artists. Hale Woodruff, Lois Mailou Jones, and put together within the context of modern art sales here at Swann, a sale. And the two Bearden collages that we featured had come from a National Gallery retrospective. They sold for over $100,000 for the first time, setting a new auction record here at Swann for an important African-American artist. And that got people's attention. And it also got not just buyers, but consigners' attention. And from there, people came to us and said, well, you're promoting African-American art, and finally, I can see a relationship between the value that you have and what we all know these artists are worth. It's a start. It's beginning to equate some of the prices with their significance. And from that, we did it twice. We had success. And it opened the market. It allowed us to get consignments. People were comfortable dealing with Swann. They knew that we were vested in this. And that my whole goal from the beginning has been about promoting, obviously it's about raising the value of African-American artists and focusing on those artists and trying to raise their significance as well as their price at auction, trying to get the best possible works, to do a curated show that really would show to the artwork and the art world and beyond the range of African-American art. And we that's where we started.
So I'm going to go back to Danny, because Danny's over there.
Yeah.
And he's, Danny, I mean, again, like an autodidactic polymath, I think is the best way of not using a lot of words. Self-taught artist. He's an artist, an educator, and a patron. A lot of the artists of this particular time, we're going to fix his sound a minute, of the WPA, which was after World War II, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a project called the Work Progress Act? Works Progress Administration. Administration, which allowed a lot of black artists to create work, and then that sort of dovetailed into the Harlem Renaissance. So a lot of those artists were not only artists, but activists, educators, and teachers. Mm-hmm. And I think when I had these long chats with Danny on the phone the other day, I kind of saw the parallels. Can you tell us specifically what is Rush Arts? And talk a little bit about the social work you do. We had that conversation yesterday.
Well, it goes before Rush Arts, and it really starts with me being an artist and looking for a venue to show my art. And at the time, there was Soho, and I took my slides at the time and a little resume, and I marched around Soho for most of a day and did not see in any gallery that I went in any black artists. And so, I took it upon myself. I said, well, I'm going to show black artists so I could show myself also. And so I went to my brother Russell and I said, can I co-opt your
I'm sorry,
office?
Danny, you need to tell people who Russell is.
My brother.
And?
Well, I was getting, it'll come. And he had his offices at the time, which was Rush Productions, which was his management company long before Def Jam. And I said, I want to use the walls in your place to give an art show. And I put a couple of artists on the wall, and we had hundreds of people show up. And that morphed into me gutting out the ground level of my brownstone in Bedford-Stuyvesant, creating the Sanctuary Gallery. And then I did that for a couple of years. I went down to Tribeca and partnered with these young guys on a gallery called Annexed. And Annexed is really where I marked the time where we've started to make real inroads of people recognizing, and see, what Nigel did was recognize artists, because we've always recognized who we are within our own community. You know, we've always had our stars and our superstars, but really nobody was looking at emerging artists. You know, you had to be worth something. Mm-hmm. And I was like, how do you perpetuate a culture without nurturing the next generation? And so that's what I was about. And then my thought was, how do I nurture the next generation? How do I get people to do it? And hip hop was so big. So I decided to call it Rush because that was Russell's company. And so people, when they hear Rush, my thought at the time, and I remember this very distinctly, people know what Rush is, they know it's excellent, they know they got all of this. Now Rush is gonna do art. And so I got people to come on that tip. And what we did is me and this cat named Manu, when we got down to Annex, was say, okay, Friday, we did it Black History Month. It was our first show. And so the first Friday was art. And the art stayed on the wall the whole month, and the next Friday was poetry. And the next Friday was film. And the next Friday was fashion. And so we had thousands of people coming down to see all this creativity by young Black people. And so from there, it just kept growing and growing, and I eventually moved out of there because the rent moved us out of there.
It happens to every art gallery
and the rent moved,
part of town.
The rent moved us out of there, and what I did was say, well, listen, and I gave a couple of shows at remote places. We launched the group called the Fugees at our next show called Sankofa. It was about a year later. And Sankofa we did on a big 10,000 square foot loft on Houston Street.
Yeah.
And we had about 10,000 people come because it was musicians, just that. And my idea was always to mix all the cultures together to get people to think art was hip.
Yeah.
And I made sure I invited celebrities so everybody would come see the celebrities. So it was a strategy of integrating art into popular culture, and people started looking at it. And you see that now with Swiss Beats and all of that. It's all tied in. But it really came from a strategy to push art into the mainstream so kids or young people would dig it. Like, this is hip. And so this is what I did. And then eventually, when I got tired of begging people for space and didn't want to pay for it, I started Rush Philanthropic Arts Foundation. And once again, I went to my brother and he rented out the Puck building for me. And I got Run DMC to perform. And we also got Eartha Kitt to perform. And we raised $250,000 that night. And we opened a gallery in Chelsea. And it was at the time there was...
What was that gallery called?
Rush Arts.
Okay.
I stuck with the Rush thing, you know. And Rush Arts became the launching pad for everybody she just named now.
Right.
Hinde, and Amy, and all of these
Derek
cats.
Adams.
Derek Adams,
Yeah.
Wageshi Mutu.
Yeah.
All these cats had early or first shows at Rush Arts because it was the only place that was showing young emerging Black artists. But not only did it have walls, but it developed a spirit, because this is where we all gathered. All this intellectual creativity was going on in Rush. And this was started in '95, so it's been a minute that we've been doing this. And so that's how Rush got started, but it was really a strategy to make art hip to kids and young people so they would come and see the art and say, oh, this is cool. Whereas before, they ain't got no art show. And then if you get the girls to come, you know, the guys are going to come. So that's how we did that.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
Can you both elaborate? I'm just elaborate. Sorry. I'm gonna start with Nigel first on why auctions are so important to buyers as well as artists in this marketplace now versus when you first started this division.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, we're talking about two different ends of the market, but I think there are similarities. And the thing about, we're talking about breaking barriers,
Right.
opening up markets for whether it's new young artists or it's artists who've had a career or collectors who are now looking to sell. And what we're doing here is, and what people like about auctions is that it's transparent. It's not done in the back room. It's open to the public. Everyone can appreciate the work and then bid on it. And the prices that we achieve are made public. So there's a record of what something sold for, and the records and the values that are associated with African American art need to be seen, and people need to know how valuable and it does come down to sort of dollars and cents in the end, where Where is their place in this world? And of course now African American artists are, like you said at the beginning, are at the forefront of what we just in the art world, contemporary art. You don't have to call it African American art. But what we've been trying to do is broaden that area. So auctions can bring in, and the great thing about Swann is that we were able to do this by ourselves, because there were no kind of boundaries. And if you had a sense of the history of the artists, you didn't have to look at on the computer to see a price to know that Hugh Lee Smith was an amazing artist whose work was going to be valued. Or you didn't have to know what a Hale Woodruff would sell for to know that he's an important artist and would sell for. So we stepped in with some knowledge and the opportunity, and then we've really broadened the market. We've been really bringing in. Our first 2 years, we probably sold over 100 artists at auction who had never been at auction before.
And why is it important that artists be sold at auction?
Well, it's important for establishing, like I said, what their market is, in their value in the secondary market. Mm-hmm. That's used for appraisals. Mm-hmm. It's used for insurance valuations. And it's also includes them into a world where they should be included. We're trying to make it inclusive. Auction sales that we have, many of the works that are bought here go into museum collections, important private collections that then get given to museum shows and exhibitions and loans. And African American artists had to be included. 15 years ago, you would be surprised to see a Norman Lewis in an abstract expressionist show, but today you would expect it, and that's the change that we've seen.
Now, Danny, you have a piece in this auction.
I do.
Yes, you do. It's amazing.
It's a piece that I haven't seen in many, many years.
Now,
it's from 1997.
can you tell us from a perspective as an artist what being in an auction means to you as far as the future evaluation of your work?
It's a validation of a career that that it made it here to Swann Auction House. It means somebody bought this, and now they found a place where they can sell it without having to try to find it. It gives credibility to the art, but what I find is really most important to the artist comes second-handedly. It allows buyers to know that they are making an investment that they can count on being able to liquidate if they need to. And that's really important. If you're going to spend $10,000, $15,000 on something, you want to know that it holds the value, that the value is there. And so, they say, there's two ways to look at it. You can speculate on emerging artists, which is really great because you help create a career and you do all that. And at the same time, you can also invest in artists that have been vetted through an auction house. So that way, and this is what I've done mostly in my collecting, is to, so when I see something that's here and I buy it from Swann, so 10 years from now, I might be able to, I know where I can sell it. When you buy an emerging artist, you say, you're speculating. And a lot of the speculation that I did 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, these artists are now showing up here. And so something I bought, and I'm not going to name the names of the artists or anything, but something I bought for maybe $5,000, which helped a young emerging artist a lot at the time, might sell for $100,000 now, 20 years later. And so it's really important that this is here, because it validates not only you as a buyer, but it validates the artist. And you could say, well, you can go look at my work at Swann, or you can look at my auction record. When somebody comes to buy something, and you say, why are you charging $5,000? Mm-hmm. You're lucky you're getting it that cheap, but anyway. But look at what my work has sold at here and here and here. With private dealers, they're not going to reveal prices. They're not really necessarily going to answer that question, And one of the things I found that one dealer might sell your work for this, another dealer might sell your work for that. This has helped stabilize the market where there's a price, and you can't stray too far from it. So it's really a good thing that a Swann was here.
We're going to talk a little bit about the prices now. The prices of African American work, from what we've seen in these auctions, are wild right now. I mean, we have a Mark Bradford, I think it was $12 million. Basquiat's $100 million. I know, right? So when my research, I realized that Jack Whitten, who had a show at the Breuer, his grid revisited, a study for Black Monolith, was realized at $8,000, which I was like, what? And then in a very short period of time, dramatically raised in price. There's a comment that a lot of auction prices for African American work is still lagging behind white artists. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen tremendous change. I mean, great artists, a perfect example is Sam Gilliam. I mean, we've talked about this before, but you know, he is such a tremendous artist, such an important trailblazer, innovator, and his work, and still is achieving great things. His works were acquired by museums, but by the end of the 90s, you know, his gallery representation had fallen off, and his market in the secondary market kind of disappeared. And then when things came to auction, they were really low, embarrassingly low. So you could have bought like, you know, a major Sam Gilliam drape painting for $15,000 20 years ago.
What do they go for now?
And today it would be worth like $5 million. It's that
What?
crazy.
Really?
It's that bad. It's like, so there was a neglect, there was a lack of knowledge. What's changed is we have much more increased knowledge. We have much more interest in African American art. The curators, the historians are dynamic and changing museum shows, integrating them. But what's also changed is that the market has changed. There's a lot more interest. Market has just become a huge part of the art world. It's international. I mean, African American culture defines American culture, and it's been that way for a long time in music and from everything from jazz to hip hop to sports. But visual artists, it's been sort of kept back, and that's changing now. Now, when people are going to think about American culture, they're going to think about Candy Wiley. They're going to think about Kara Walker. I mean, she's made a huge statement on an international stage. So a lot has changed quickly, and I think this internationalization of African American art and American culture is just starting. I mean, we're seeing that with Soul of a Nation. That was originated in England. That was a show organized by the Tate and traveled
around the world.
It didn't start
at
here.
the Brooklyn Museum, yeah.
And so it's an exciting time.
I know Danny has some definite comments about the auction prices of African American work, where I think you believe, in our conversation, I'm going to paraphrase you and you can correct me, that you said that it's for some artists, not all.
Well, I mean, this is always the case. I mean,
Sure.
more for artists of color, but there are always great artists who, for some reason or another, have not been accepted by quote unquote the mainstream. And their work languishes, and it's just great art and it sits there and all that. So I mean, I think there needs to be an expansion of the market. I think there needs to be more galleries. There's more places to show these people. I think also, and Nigel's making strides in this, but I think there are so many great artists that don't make auction houses. Like 10 years ago, Sotheby's came to my house, or Christie's one. No, I think it was Sotheby's, and they had heard about my collection. I walked them around. They didn't know not one.
And just to know that he has walls and walls and walls and walls of artwork, yeah.
They did not know one artist. Wow. And it's amazing to me now they know who these people are. But I also credit the internet for spreading the word. It's a lot easier to find out about things than it would. But and just a conversation between me and Nigel, I would talk about an artist that's really, really well recognized. And I said, what's their auction price? He said, well, they don't have one yet. And I was like, why not?
And what artist was that?
I'm not going to say.
Okay, great.
I'm really not going to, target individual artists, but somebody that everybody knows.
Right.
And I was like, well, she doesn't have and it was a female. She doesn't have an auction record. And I'm like, why not? And so, Swann can't do everything. This is the truth. Swann cannot do everything because there are hundreds of artists like that. And so Swann can't do everything. We need more venues like Swann to do this. And people argue that, well, now black artists are being shown at the Sotheby's and Christie's and being sold at the... Yeah, but if you look at how many white artists are being sold and you do the math on populations and artists and this, that, and the other, it's like such a small percentage of black artists are making those places. And then, so Swann has a big, he has a whole thing dedicated. So there's still need for dedicated places for black artists to be shown, vetted, this, that, and the other. People say, well, you don't need a black gallery anymore. That's bullshit. Excuse me. But it's true. It's true. You do need it. Because where do you think they pick this stuff from? They don't know. The mainstream galleries do not know. So they look at what's happening there black. How do you think all these artists got there? They got from Rush to the Studio Museum, then out into the greater art world. And Studio Museum looked at who, and it wasn't necessarily me, it was Derek Adams, who's now an internationally known artist himself. Derek was my curator. And Derek would bring these young artists to me and say, Dan, what you think about this guy? Because they were in grad school together or undergrad school. I said, oh yeah, I like that. Go on, put him on the wall. Yeah, I'll buy one too. And thank God. And, but really, if not for a Rush and a Studio Museum, which focuses on black, these artists would not be in Heiser and Worth or any of these galleries if they didn't come through being vetted in our community first. And that's just the truth. So, people just don't walk into the mainstream. Somebody ushers them into there. And it's usually the Studio Museum at that point.
Now, these huge gains in value, like for example, the Basquiat's 100 million. You've got Mark Bradford, 12 million.
Can I just say, Basquiat's outside of this paradigm for some reason.
Yeah. But that's the example. People see these numbers and they think that it affects all African American art. So Mark Bradford's 12 million. You've got Carrie Joyce Marshall, 21 million. And you see these huge numbers. Does these huge gains in value for work exploiting or benefiting the work of these artists? And do you think are these short-term gains that are leveling out? Like, what's your opinion on that? These crazy prices that you see in the market.
Well, sure.
Go ahead.
I think, again, it's all relative, right? It's all relative. You compare that to what is Mark Bradford is an amazing contemporary artist and certainly deserves all the success. And he's such a great representative of America with the Venice Biennale, and so that's kind of what the market is. That's what his market should be.
Sam was also at the Biennale recently, yeah?
Yeah, and luckily Mark is in his prime, so this is where he's been able to be his most creative, and he's just hitting his stride. So that's what the market will bear, and I think compared to some other contemporary artists, it's good, but it's not changing the landscape. I mean, I think what's been great about some of these artists, I should mention, is Mark Bradford, Theoster Gates. They've taken this kind of model that Danny's been pioneering, which is developing not just your own career, but developing the careers of others, providing spaces for learning, for education, for artists to thrive. And a lot of artists today have this kind of activist idea of
But isn't that continuing with the tradition of what artists did during, what Danny does, of course, but what the WPA and during the Harlem Renaissance?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, African American artists have had to take care of themselves.
Spiral Gallery.
Yeah,
Spiral
yeah,
Gallery,
Spiral.
exactly.
And that was started in '64 with Romare Bearden and Charles Alston and this
then
whole group
Jam Gallery as well?
Yeah, listen, the Chicago Southside Community Art Center is still there today. It's still a vibrant contemporary art center. You know why? Even after the WPA closed during World War II, it's still there and still an important part of the community because the African American artists, the artists who worked there, they didn't just take the government money, they bought the building. And they owned the building. They took ownership in it and they could control it. So when the government money went away, they still had it. So I think it's taking ownership and developing others. And
Exactly what I did in Philly.
Yeah.
I went and bought an old bank and turned it into a gallery. And so I don't charge myself rent. So we're going to have a gallery. No, but I don't charge the foundation,
Yeah.
So, it's my contribution. So we're going to have a gallery. Whether somebody gives us some money or not, if we can buy a bottle of wine and get a nail, we're going to put some stuff on the wall. And so we're going to make sure that we are there, we are seen. And like I said before, for me, my mission is art is a vehicle for social justice for me. And so I traditionally look for, it used to be Clinton Hill, a neighborhood that down the block was crack, prostitution. I put a gallery right there and changed the neighborhood. Right now I'm in a neighborhood called Logan in Philadelphia with a big gallery on the corner and the winos come in and I really like this painting, man. And that's what's important. That is the important thing. And on Saturdays, we got the kids from the neighborhood coming there, and they're painting and they're seeing art. And art has always been a vehicle to uplift people. And so, if we can continue to do that, it's not just about the artists. We, of course, want to have a place for the artists. We want to have a place for community because art will change communities that need changing and need help. And so, Rush has always been a social work mission through the arts. And, Rush, we've in 10 schools in New York City at one point. Rush has always been a social work mission. And I think that's important. When you can find a way to uplift the community through culture in a really organic way, not throw things at it, present something and let them see and let them come to it. That's the important thing for me. And then I buy the artists that I put on my walls. And a lot of it, I have maybe 400 or 500 paintings. Some in storage, some in this, that, and the other. Over the years, I just bought people and this, that, and the other. And some of it you're going to make some money on later on, and say, oh, sure, I'm going to sell some of this to buy some more artists. And this is what I intended to do with my collection. Recycle it to buy the next generation of artists, to buy the next generation of artists. So when I just sold something recently at Swann, at the last auction, I bought 5 new artists. And then I had some money left too.
So I'm going to go a little bit, because I think we're running out of time. Black art isn't a style, but a social construct. And my question to both of you, is it important for us to make the distinction, or have we made such strides that our work is recognized as American art? And the reason why I use this example is one of my favorite Kerry James Marshall portraits is the Scipio Moorhead portrait, myself as an artist in 1776, is owned by the Smithsonian. And it is listed as an American portrait in African and American culture. My question to two of you is the goal ultimately for you as an artist, or the goal ultimately for African American artists, to be considered American?
You want me to take it first?
Yeah.
I'll defer to Danny.
It's a question different artists take different ways.
Right.
Some people want to just be known as an artist, American artist. Some people want to be known as a black. It doesn't really make any difference. It depends on how you look at, your thing. Like I said before, and I think this is part of it, there's still a need for black galleries. I think there will always be a need for black galleries. I think as long as there's inequity on any level, across any subject in this country, or in this world even, then you might have to take those people who are oppressed or downtrodden and give them things to show them.
So you believe that
the
there's
best.
an ongoing admission of African American artists in the
I
visual
think some
space?
people
Yeah?
want to be called African American artists. I think some people want to be called artists. I think it's an individual artist's choice. I don't think it's a social question to be asked to like what, unless it's an individual choice. It's not a. I don't think that question is a broadband social construct.
But do you believe that? Do you believe there's an ongoing admission of African American artists in the mainstream?
Ongoing omission?
Yeah.
Oh, I think that's what we've been talking about.
Yeah,
This
I mean-
whole thing. That
I think-
there is a lack of representation on the level that it needs to be across the board. And so Rush, Swann, Corrine down in, I can't remember the name. King Caliber. All of these people are galleries that address that. Yes, there's an omission. There's a big omission. Even though there's progress, there's still an omission.
Yeah.
Now,
Still work to be done.
do you consider
That's my 2 cents.
Swann to be a boutique auction house? Yes.
Yeah, that's we're
This is a question that Danny actually.
we have a specialization,
talked
and
about.
we've developed specializations, and so we've as an auction house that's how we define ourselves. We have specializations and works on paper, books, and African American art is part of it.
Are you finding that in this division you're attracting the same buyers as larger auction houses? And like, how do you, like he brought up Sotheby's and Christie's, who now are also including African American work in their auctions. How do you?
Well, they don't have our mailing list. They don't have this clientele. We've developed it. You work and you do the legwork, and also it's being comfortable with collectors, knowing the artists, not just going to the galleries. I think we've tried. I've tried. Tina and I have both tried to give, to be accessible, to work with collectors, museums, and to kind of create an environment where the artists are really valued and are not just talking about dollars.
Now, for both of you, what do you recommend people new to collecting and are looking to dip in their toe into the auction world? What do you recommend? And if there was any piece of art today that you would buy, what would it be?
Oh, well, I'll start there. I mean, the great thing about Swann is, as I mentioned,
He's going to do the promo.
we do have a range here. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about Swann, and our auctions is accessible to everyone, whether you're a first-time buyer. We have works on paper and works of art that begin at $1,000. You can work well into the market and wherever interest you have. And we're also accessible. You can pick up the phone and speak to us.
But what piece of art would you have today?
Oh, well, you want me to plug something in the sale?
You talking about unlimited amount of money?
No, in here today.
In here.
Well, there's a wonderful painting by an artist. His last name is Simmons.
Good answer.
How about you, Danny?
Good answer. I would. One of my biggest influences, I have periods of painting with things. I take on some of the stuff. It was Norman Lewis. And so there's some beautiful, beautiful Norman Lewis's here that I would want to add to my collection. I like abstraction the best of all the art of the creative form.
Yeah.
So I would pick a Norman Lewis. I don't know exactly which one I would pick.
Yeah.
But Norman in here is my favorite artist, besides myself, I mean.
Well, that's a great example because we have been able, at Swann, we've been able to show the range and diversity of Norman Lewis's work. He's such an interesting artist. He's not just big abstract paintings. That's obviously a big part of his work, but works on paper. He was a great printmaker, and you can see his works here from his social realist days to works he did in the 70s. So that's been a fun part of Swann, showing all the different aspects of the artist, not just sort of the one artwork that everyone associates with them.
Yeah, can I just add one thing?
No worries.
Which is really strange because Swann has sold a number of my pieces over the years, and I'm always surprised to see them in the catalog. And I'm always happy that somebody's able to, who might need the money, get the money. selling a piece. But the piece that I have here right now is so different than the last piece that sold because it's like 10 years or 15 years difference. And so Nigel has probably sold a piece from, except for the more modern pieces, like the last 6 or 7 years, he's probably been able to sell a piece of every stage of my career here to someone.
One of my favorite pieces is there's a Candy Wiley piece here. I think it's the Fulani woman, and it's a piece that he did in high school.
Yeah.
So we get to see his piece when he was in high school, but you also can walk over to 42nd Street and see one of his contemporary pieces.
Rumors
I think
of
that's
War.
pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
I think we have a few minutes. I'm looking for a hand up if we have a few minutes to take some questions. Yes, right over here.
Let me give you the mic. Let me get you the mic.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. When you were talking about some of the galleries that came along in the 60s and 70s, I didn't hear mention of Cinque Gallery.
Oh, yeah, right there on Houston Street.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Bruce Jett.
yeah.
Cinque Gallery was a very important. I had early shows there. I mean, they did the work that we all did, show artists that there was no place else to be seen. So when you looked at Soho, that was the only black gallery there for a long time.
June Kelly.
Before June Kelly,
Yeah.
Cinque was there. Then June Kelly came, who was really, she showed a lot of black artists, but she showed everybody. Cinque was directly dedicated to showing emerging and black artists. So you can see a master there, and you can see somebody whose career just started.
Great.
What tools have you guys used to actually mentor the next great art dealers to bring them up?
That's a good question.
Art dealers.
Art
That's
dealers.
a different question.
Excuse me, galleries, art.
well-
I know it's a big difference, but.
Well, I think just engagement. You know, we're in the market too, and we have great relationships with dealers and young collectors and people who are beginning. And I think the great thing about Swann is it's a place where we can have discussions about what artists we see and what we like and where we see things moving. So for us, it's just being an accessible place where we can stage work. You know, the contemporary, as an auction house, the contemporary work that we sell is a small part. You know, it takes steps to get things from the artist studio to contemporary gallery to an auction house. So sometimes it's getting smaller and smaller. Sometimes things painted just a few years ago are selling at auction. But we're really just trying to create an environment where you can see works and discover how things are being collected, where you can see a diversity of artists. So it's really more about a meeting place, a marketplace.
So I'm going to add to that. I met Nigel from a collector who we belonged to the same sort of arts club. And I was like, we should do a talk. And that was 6 months ago. And this is actually my first chat talking about art. So accessibility, I mean, could I walk into Sotheby's and do that? Probably not, you know. I mean, I can very easily hop from Sotheby's to Christie's or here. But here, I mean, these catalogs that you have that you're being given today, for me, allowed me to be able to sort of research. In the month that I've been working on this idea, I have discovered so much about art, and I've been able to call and ask questions and be demanding. So it is an accessibility that you're going to get outside of the bigger houses, to ask the questions and not be afraid to ask the questions, as there's no dumb questions. It's just you don't know. I have personally, you know, I didn't realize there were African-American art in the late 18th centuries, like the CPO Moorhead piece for me by Carrie James Marshall, Circle That Back. That was a painter, an African slave, who did a painting that was on the cover of a book by Phyllis Wheatley, right? Mm-hmm. They sold that book here because they have an African-American Americana and manuscript sale as well. And I was like, what? You know, and it's, I mean, there's so much more of a learning process here and a learning curve. So, you know, don't be afraid to come in and ask questions. And these catalogs are basically like history lessons, you know, and you get to see the scope. And I know it sounds like a commercial, but you get to see the scope of African-American work that is not just the type that you think is sort of the radical protest work. You get to see abstraction, figurative, landscape. And it really opened my eyes as someone who wants to be a curator and a gallerist in the future about what there is in this particular type of work.
I just wanted to add to what Rush's role has been in that it hasn't been really working with new galleries. But one of the things that Rush has always pushed is also a place for emerging curators. And so a lot of curators who are now on the national scene had curated their first show at Rush.
Right.
And so, down through, so, we're about really just giving people, whether you're a curator or artist. I mean, deaf poetry started at the gallery also. We took it out of the gallery and put it on HBO, then on Broadway, and won a Tony Award for it. A lot of things can come out of just giving people a hand, because all artists and anybody really needs is space to do their thing. And if you got that space and you are open to allowing people to do their thing, great things can happen.
I think that's a perfect way to end it. Thank
Okay,
you.
we got one more question.
Oh,
One more
sorry.
question.
Oh, that was such a great summation. You have to do an encore now.
Well, first of all, thank you all for hosting
Yeah.
this tonight. But my question is towards Nigel.
Sure.
Given the history of where you started, can you shed a little bit more light on the evolution of your role and what you have seen in the development and the expansion of collectors from the African American perspective?
Yeah,
And where you think we may be going and what needs to happen?
Well, it has changed a lot. I mean, we've been doing this for a while now.
How many years?
So we're into our 12th year. So we had our first auction in February of 2007. Yeah. And so the Swann has changed, the art market has changed, the African American art market, as we've been talking about, has changed. And some of the big trends are how much broader it is. And Danny was speaking this about the internet. So we could have a work by an African American artist, and maybe 10 years ago, it was a small, limited group of buyers who were savvy and knew about Swann. But now I can get an email from somebody in Hong Kong or Thailand about a contemporary work here. So the reach that's a big change. And we're also excited to see just more diversity in the amount of art we sell, the kinds of art we sell, more contemporary, and reaching into areas, and it's always changing. Of course, collecting is about taste and what people want, so whether it's more political work or assemblage, collage, there are trends that change the market, but I think the biggest change has been broadening our base, reaching a bigger audience, and also seeing, the artists are finally getting some due. Seeing, it's a great thing to see works that were acquired here in gallery, museum shows, museum traveling exhibitions. And we've been doing it long enough now that sometimes things get consigned back to Swann.
I just have one thing to say. I've been told, by certain people, collectors, blah, blah, well, why were you taking your stuff to Swann when you could, this artist would sell at Sotheby's or Christie's or something? There's some sort of prejudice like that those places have better reach. Well, I just have to tell you that an artist who's recently been selling on the market, the greatest price she ever realized for a piece of her work was here.
Thank you.
Was here. And 3 months later, somebody tried to sell this almost the exact same thing and got half at Sotheby's as what was gotten here. So if somebody tells you that, oh, you should take it to them, they got a bigger reach. No, they don't. They just have a different reach, but maybe their audience doesn't appreciate African American art quite as much as the audience who comes looking for the African American art. There you go.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great.
You can slip me that 50 now.
That was quite an encore.
We're all going to be walking around, so I'm sure if you have any questions, as I
Thank
said,
you.
come to the Swann Gallery. People come to me.